Welcome to this editor webinar. Thank you for joining us. I'm Anita and I'm part of the Learning and Content Management team. I'll be hosting the session today, and joining me are my colleagues Jennifer, Elizabeth, and Charlotte. If you have a question at any time, please use the Q&A option to send your questions directly to us. We'll try to answer as many as possible today directly in the Q&A field, and at the end of the session, we'll answer a couple of the most common questions raised. But please bear in mind, we cannot answer any journal-specific questions. For the best view, you may wish to drag the central bar on your screen to the right to enlarge the screen that I'm sharing. Our session is being recorded today, and you'll be sent a link when the recording is ready. Our topic today is Article Transfer Service, working with Article Transfer Service, ATS, a practical guide for editors. And I hope that in the next 30 minutes, we can enhance your understanding of this topic. So let's get into the agenda. Our agenda today asks these three main questions. What is Article Transfer Service, ATS, and why is it an important tool? What ATS workflows are possible in Editorial Manager and how do they work? What is the ATS experience for editors in both feeder and receiver journals, as well as authors? And you will notice that we use the abbreviation ATS to mean the Article Transfer Service throughout our session today. So what is ATS? ATS is the process of rejecting an article from one journal using a specific type of transfer decision term and facilitating the submission to an alternative journal. The journal rejecting the paper is the feeder journal. The journal the paper is transferred to is the receiver journal. And there must be pre-established connection between these journals for the transfer to take place. This illustration on screen shows us ATS in its most simplistic form, and we'll take a look at more detailed example shortly. So what are the benefits of ATS and why is it important to you as an editor to participate? Transfers are easy and no extra work is required from you. You have already assessed the manuscript, and that knowledge can be used to help the author get published in another journal. It also helps with the retention rate. Our metrics show a larger portion of the rejects from Elsevier journals are high quality and go on to be published in competitive titles. Multiple journals engaged in ATS have been able to help over 10% of rejected authors to publication. We've also received some positive feedback from authors. Now let's look in more detail at how ATS works between journals and the possible workflows available. ATS connections between feeder and receiver journal in EM, Editorial Manager, must be established in order for the transfers to happen. And these can be set up in two ways. Some journals are feeder only, some are receiver only. This is a unidirectional connection. Some journals are both feeder and receiver journals. These are bidirectional connections. For example, if journal A is connected to feed journal B only, this is a unidirectional connection. If journal A feeds journal B and journal B feeds journal A as well, the connection is bidirectional. And we apply these terms when there are more than two journals making a connection. We are now going to look at some more details of an ATS workflow in Editorial Manager. In this illustration, we can see how ATS might work in a real-life example. You can see that there is more than one receiver journal possible. Journal A is rejecting a paper and offering a transfer to journal B or C. If the author agrees with the transfer, the submission files are transferred over to the receiver journal. The viewer comments will also be transferred with the submission. But please note, the submission to one of the suggested journal does not guarantee publication. This is one example depending on the connections of the journal. So there are multiple workflows available, and we would ask editors to check with the publisher about any specific workflows that are available to their journal. As an indication of how frequently an ATS offer should be made, our standard guidance is that transfer offers should be made to approximately 60% of rejected manuscripts. But again, this is individual to the journal, and the editors should check with their publisher for further guidance. When the transfer offer is made, there are several options for the feeder journal. And in this illustration, you can see two of the most common workflow options available to the feeder journals. Editor's choice, also known as editor-driven, is where an editor of a feeder journal uses a reject and transfer decision type and will then be presented with the list of receiver journals to which the journal is connected. The editor selects one or more appropriate receiver journals from which the author will then be able to choose one or none. Most journals follow this workflow. Author's choice, also called as author-driven, is where the editor of a feeder journal uses a reject and transfer decision type, but will not be presented with a list of available receiver journals. Instead, the author will be offered a transfer option to all of the journals to which the feeder journal is connected and will be able to make the selection. When a paper is rejected from the feeder journal, the editor must use a decision type that will enable the transfer of a submission to a receiver journal. We can see here the most common decision types in this category. Pre-review is used to reject an article before a review has taken place, similar to a desk reject. Transfer post-review is used to reject an article after a review has taken place, similar to a standard reject. Transfer recommend exit is a special type of transfer post-review, which is used to guarantee acceptance in the receiver journal. Feeder editors may specify conditions of acceptance. For example, if I should say, revisions that are needed in the decision letter. This decision term should only be enabled when a relationship between the feeder and the receiver journal has been established, such that the receiver editors have agreed to honor such a decision, and the feeder editors fully understand the acceptance of the criteria of the receiver journal. And the next one is transfer guaranteed review. So this is a special type of transfer pre-review that is used to guarantee peer review in the receiver journal. This decision term should only be enabled when a relationship between the feeder and the receiver journal has been established, such that the receiver editors have agreed to honor such a decision. If editors are interested in enabling this decision term, then they should flag it to their publishers, who can advise on what might be possible for the journal. We are now going to see how these workflows look to the editor in the feeder journal, to the author of the manuscript being transferred, and to the editor in the receiver journal. Now let's take an example of the most common workflow, which is editor's choice. Serena is the editor of Journal A, and she has received a submission with the title Valuable Research. She doesn't think this manuscript is suitable for her journal. In Editorial Manager, on the decision-making page, Serena selects the decision term Transfer Pre-Review and notifies the author about her decision. Since this is an editor's choice workflow, now Serena will be presented with a list of available receiver journals. She then chooses the appropriate journal or journals. Serena will send the decision letter now. The decision letter informs the author that the journal participates in Elsevier's Article Transfer Service, ATS, that there is no need to reformat or resubmit, and the transfer of the manuscript will be done for them. Jack is the author of the manuscript Valuable Research. He will first receive the editor's decision letter with a link to accept or decline the transfer offer. If he decides he wants to transfer the paper, he can do it in 4 easy steps by clicking on the link in the email. The corresponding author will receive an email to confirm the transfer. After the confirmation, the manuscript will transfer to the selected receiver journal. And step 3, the receiver journal will send emails to the corresponding author asking them to sign into their Editorial Manager site and continue with the submission. And step 4, the authors can make any desired changes before approving the PDF, and they can cancel at any time. Zoe is the editor of the receiver journal, Journal B. She will see the paper Valuable Research in her new assignments folder. She'll be able to identify transferred manuscripts via specific ATS flags, which will show on the action list for the manuscript. A special transfer information section in the Details tab will give her all the transfer details. If the transfer takes place after peer review, review reports and details are transferred along with the article. To view the reviewer's recommendations, click on the link View Transferred Information. In this illustration, we can see the reviewer's comments that were transferred along the submission. The reviews or the contact details of the reviewers are included for the receiver journal, depending on the permission given by each of the reviewers. So, thank you for listening to the content of today's session. We hope you found it useful. We're now going to spend the last few minutes looking at the questions raised by you today. I'm now going to hand it over to Charlotte, who will share the most commonly raised questions in the session today. Over to you, Charlotte.
Hi, thank you. So we haven't had any questions raised in the Q&A field at the moment, but we do have some time in the session now. So I would just like to open up the floor for questions for a few minutes. And we have the LCM team here. So if you have a question, please post it in the Q&A field and we will be able to answer it in the session now. So we'll just give people a few minutes to do that. And I'm just having a look at the chat as well. Yeah, so we have a request to share a prototype of letters, asking authors to, when you ask an author to submit, so basically the transfer letter. So we've just seen that on screen. There it is. Okay, yeah, so I think we just saw that on screen, and yeah, people saying thanks, it was very clear, so that's great. We've got a couple of questions coming through here, I think. So I'll ask Jennifer and Elizabeth to start answering those questions and then we'll provide the answers. So we're getting a confirmation here. If the transfer is done post-review, will the reviewers' comments be shared with the journal that it's transferring to? So generally speaking, yes. The onus is that those reviews are transferred, and we're trying to make that kind of as standard as possible. But the reviewer does still have an option to decline to have their review comments transferred. But overall, yes, that's the plan, that they get transferred over. Another question here, what's the main indication to transfer an article to another journal? So that will be once the relationship is set up, once you have the ATS connections set up, then, and you're declining a paper, if you feel that it's more suitable for one of the other journals, then that's when you would make that decision to transfer it rather than just reject it. If you think it could be placed elsewhere, then please do place it elsewhere, because that means that that can go on to be a successful publication elsewhere, hopefully. I'm just having another look at the questions. So managing editors involved in article transfer service can be working at feeders or at receivers. And can we elaborate on the differences? So the feeder, if you're working with the feeder journal, they are rejecting submissions from their journal and suggesting a transfer to other journals. And receiver journals are receiving those submissions. And of course, as Anita said, sometimes we get journals that do both. So they both feed submissions out to other journals and they receive them. So I hope that clarifies the difference between the two there. Let's have another look at some of the, we're getting some questions coming in. This is great, thank you. How can we evaluate which journal will be the most appropriate for receiving the paper? So that's quite, I guess, a journal specific question, because it really depends on what journals you have in your cluster. It may be that you have ones that, you know, just slightly different subject areas or linked in some other way. So it's really a case of understanding what the links are for your journal. So what the article transfer service cluster that your journal is part of. And if you want some more information on that for your journal, then the best place is to go to your journal manager or your publisher, and they will be able to explain the connections that are set up for your journal and perhaps give you a bit more guidance about where you might be directing papers to if you're rejecting them from your journal. Okay, just having another look here. Okay, I transfer manuscripts pre-review, but I never receive feedback on the outcomes. How do I set this up? That's an interesting question, actually. Anita and Elizabeth on the call, I don't know if either of you have the answer to that. I don't think there's anything in place, is there, that would necessarily give feedback to the feeder journal. So other than just contacting them directly and asking, is there any other ways that you're aware of that would happen, that kind of status update or feedback would happen?
Yeah, exactly, Charlotte. Yeah, you're right. We don't have any special mechanism for the feeder journal to know about this information.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, I find that an interesting question. Development team is kind of something that could or might be developed. Okay, just having another look at some of these questions. Yeah, so just another expansion on that question about what's the main indication to transfer an article. So I was kind of focused on if you think it would be suitable elsewhere, but Jennifer's answered that question really well by saying partly is whether the content is good. So if you think it's a very good manuscript, it would be good for publishing, but just not in your journal, then that's a really main indicator that it could be transferred and it would be successful elsewhere. Okay, just having a look. Thank you. We've still got some more questions open here. decision in the hands of the editor-in-chief or also in the associate editor. So that will really depend on the workflow of your journal and the way that the editors are set up. And again, that's maybe why it's a good idea to contact the publisher or the journal manager just to establish how it works for your journal. If you're an editor making a decision on a paper and you have the option in your drop-down menu for the transfer decision, then you'll know that you can make that decision choice. If you then go ahead and notify the author directly, then you will be making that decision. If your paper goes back to the editor-in-chief for ratification, then they'll see that you suggested a transfer, but they will have the final decision on that. So it's worth checking the exact workflow for your journal then. Okay, so we've answered a couple verbally, and then we've answered a few more in the actual chat field there. Yep, okay, I think I've shared kind of the main ones there. We've got a couple more questions. Yeah, I think we've answered the ones that are open now. Thanks, Anita. So I'll pass back to you for the final slides. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Charlotte. Thank you. Okay. I'm sorry. Yeah. So as a reminder, before we finish today, so there are other events running as a part of the Editor Learning Week, and there is still time for you to sign up for some of these via the link you used to sign up for today. So we'll post that link in the chat now. This is also where you can find the recording of all sessions available at the end of this week. On screen, you can see the topics we are running this week. And that brings us to the end of our webinar today. Thank you for listening to us. So now please take a few moments to complete our short survey. You'll see a QR code on screen now, which you can use by opening your phone camera and holding it over the QR code, which will prompt a link to the survey on your phone. So we'll post the survey link in the chat now. The survey closes at the end of the week, and the information you provide here will help us create and deliver these editor webinars. After this session, we'll send you an email that will contain some of the helpful links to the webinar recording, short video guides, full editorial manager training videos, and our self-help editor guide. So please look out for that email. And again, thank you for joining us. See you next time. you.